watching Notes in 9.
Hello, and welcome to Notes of 9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 122, Working with Java Objects in X Pages. Beans are good for your heart. The more you eat, the more you can fill in the blank there. Okay, so just a quick little Notes of 9 update. I had this on the blog a little while ago, but I figured, well, might as well put it on the show. Notes of 9 recently had its 4 year anniversary, and we're up to 35 hours plus of content and over 31 great contributors with I'm talking another one already, so hopefully we'll get him on soon. And between my website hosting, which is different, and YouTube, which I don't do a lot with anymore, but that may change. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm up to 200,000 plus downloads overall for mostly X Pages content. So I think that's a good sign for X Pages itself. I think I'm still seeing growth, and I'm kind of happy with all that. I did want to mention, I don't know if I mentioned on the show before, but I did make a mind map a little while ago, this episode guide, or map sometimes I call it. And here's a tiny URL to get there. And I couldn't fit the whole screen because it's just too big to put on the screencast or so. But it's just basically a way to try to help you find older shows categorized, because I've got some blog problems. So if you were to go to that link and click on it, you see a list of like all the show titles with an attempt to make at least one category there. You click on it, you get to the show. Hopefully, you get an answer to your problem. So don't miss that. If you haven't seen that yet, don't miss that. That's possibly good stuff. I don't know. Okay, speaking of YouTube and stuff like that, I've got some questions because I really don't know. When I abandoned YouTube a long time ago, no one seemed to care. And then I tweeted it a little while ago, and people said, "Oh yeah, come back to YouTube. Do YouTube. I love YouTube." So I don't really know. So how do you prefer to consume Notes of 9? Do you like to stream Notes of 9 and download it to watch offline? And how do you download the show? I know you can get it from iTunes because I'm in the iTunes music store, just in their podcast section. So you can download it that way. You can also download it directly from the website. There's like a little download link or something like that. So do you use your own RSS reader or not? Or do you actually prefer YouTube? Now, if YouTube, I guess there is no offline access, and it's not easy to make a downloadable version, or I don't think I can put a show on YouTube and have that feed like the iTunes Music Store. So I always thought the offline access was more important. Um, what do you guys think? Please leave a comment to the show, or send me a tweet or an email, and let me know, because I'm curious, and I may make some changes here. I don't know. Certainly, I guess if I just went to YouTube, it would be easier and cheaper. Um, but if I don't know if I want to lose all that offline capability. So please let me know what you think. Okay, in today's show, I want to talk about Java a little bit, and just do this basic Java object discussion. And what's kind of cool about this show is this came directly from my day job with a presentation basically I gave to the X Pages team where I work, because I was just playing with some different things. So before we get into that, let's just talk about the Java object. So if you've not yet gotten into Java, and I do recommend you consider it, because it's not that scary, it's not that hard. But a Java object is similar to a Lotus Script custom class. Now in Lotus Script, you can make a custom class with setters and getters, this object. So you can make a Lotus Script company object, put it in a script library, and do use this class or this script library, and now you can use that object in multiple places. It makes it available. So that's kind of cool, and I did a lot of that in Lotus Script. So it is helpful in agents and things like that, but it's not persistent. So you have to keep rebuilding that object every time you want to use it and stuff like that. And the XPages solution to that really is when you get into Java, you get this thing called this managed bean, which I think is just a scary term. So what is a managed bean? A managed bean is no different than a Lotus Script custom class. You make your Java object with your setters and getters just like you would approach a Lotus Script solution. And the managed part comes in is you just have to add like 4 lines into the Faces config file to give it like a scope, and then XPages will create it for you automatically rather than you having to create it yourself. Okay, big whoop. But some people like that, and that's what everybody seems to be talking about is this managed bean. But managed bean is not the only way to use Java objects in your code. Okay, so there's some other ways to do it. We've got this concept called object data, which I think came in through the extension library and update pack. There's a data context where you can use these Java objects, which I think has been in from the beginning. I know Paul Withers has blogged a lot about data context. And then there's what I'm going to just call scoped binding, which is my term that I'm just making up. So the demo is going to kind of show you how to basically, it's not a great demo, but it's going to show you how to use a Java object inside either managed bean, object data, data context, scope binding, and what that looks like. So all this is to show you kind of like different ways to do it. You don't have to just go the managed bean route. All right, with that being said, then let's go to the demo. Okay, so let me just take you through what I have to show you today for today's demo. I've got a simple application here. It has one form. If I click on it, it has a first name, last name, a city, and a unique key. Okay, and I've got a view by key, and I've just got a main view. Okay, there's nothing to it. That's it for the classic stuff. Okay, and if I go to the website, I've got a simple repeat control here, and it's just a bunch of links in here to do a bunch of things. And what we have is the ability to create and edit objects via managed beans, via the object data, the data context, and the scope binding. So first I'm going to prove to you that they all work, and then I'm going to show you how they work. So we're going to manage, bean, and we don't really need a city there, and we can do object data, because I just like to prove that these things work, not only just for you but for me, because it's always impresses me that they work sometimes. So that's a good feeling. Context, whatever, close enough. You get the point. And finally, scope binding. And I'm sure I'll say this more than once, but I'm making up all these terms. These are not official terms of scope binding or so. That's just crap I'm making up. Okay, so we've made these new things here by these links, and we can edit them just as easily. See how it edits? And we can edit object data with data context. There's nothing special there. We can use the object data editing, and we can edit through scope binding, whatever. Okay, so all this stuff I'm about to show you works. I think we can agree on that. Okay, so what am I doing here? Okay, well, first I want to show you the Java class that's involved in this example. There's only one Java class that I'm using. I mean, this one here is a helper thing from Jeremy, but don't worry about that right now. So all this is a class called person. It has a couple internal methods, private methods for the first and last name, the city, read only, which I'm not currently using, the unid, a flag as to whether or not this has been saved yet, whether it's a new note, and the unique key, the more human readable unique key than the unit itself. Okay, and I've got some methods here. First says this is an argumentless constructor, which is required for managed beans, and that's the only reason it's sitting there. I've got a method where I can create an object, and what I first do when I create an object is I do this clear function. And what's the clear function do? It basically just clears these private members. Okay, so it just gets rid of them. Okay, then I set new note to true. I get the session, because I like @uniques. Gosh darn it, not everybody does, but I like using them. I think they're a little friendlier. I think they're smaller. I just like them, so I'm going to use them. A lot of people just use unids, and good for them. But I like @uniques. So what all I'm doing here for a new new object is I'm just setting it up with it exists. It's got a value of true for new note, and it's got a unique key that can be used on saving. I've got additional methods here. The first one is load by key. So I have the ability to take that key and read it in, and we get the session. And actually, in this example, this is really not good Java code. I'm not here to show you the object itself. So I don't think these are actually even used. but this, or at least the session isn't used. But I'm getting the current database by JSFUtil get current database, and there's other ways around that. I'm getting the view, I'm getting the document by key. If the doc is nothing right now, which should never happen, but if it's nothing right now, I'm just printing out it's not found. And if it is something, I'm going to call this load values and pass in my doc, and then I do some recycling here. I have another method where I can load actually by the unit, because the unit is a little faster. You don't have to get the view and stuff like that. So I pass in the unit, and I do a get document by unit to get my doc, and I do the exact same thing. If it's nothing, I just print. Otherwise, I do load value and then do my recycling. The load values, I pass in this. It takes the passed in document, and it just reads these values in to the Java object. And then again, when it returns, we recycle this. So we do not hold on to the Domino document. We already have the values. We've got the unit. We've got the key. So we can get this document back easy peasy. Okay. When we do want to save this after we manipulate it, we get the document again. In this case here, I'm going to start the document off as null. I declare it outside my if-then statement. And if a new note is true, then I create. I set document equals to a created document, and then I replace the item value form, the form field with person. And if it's not new, then I just load it by the unit, so it's a little faster. And then for both of those cases, so it's outside of this loop, then I'm replacing my internal properties, or whatever they're called, and I'm writing them out to disk. Okay, and that's how it works. Again, I'm not quite here to show you. The focus is not on this crappy code here in this bean, which does not have enough recycles. So I used a doc here, so there should be a doc dot recycle for sure. So you have to recycle this stuff in Java. But again, that's what I'm here to show you. But that's the class, right, or the object. Okay, nothing fancy there, nothing really scary. So the point of this demonstration is how do we use that object? There's many different ways to use that, and one of the most common and one of the most talked about is the concept of managed bean. And all managed bean means is you go into faces config and you basically declare it here, person bean. What is it? com.notes9.examples.person, and I'm setting this up in the session scope. So XPages manages it for you. You do not need to create a managed bean. It's there for you. So how do I use it? When I want to create a new managed bean, or not, when I want to create a new person using the managed bean technique, this is just a simple link, and I'm just have some simple actions on here, one with script. I'm just saying person bean create. So notice person bean, I just assume it's there. That's the whole purpose of managed bean, is that you don't have to actually create. There's no new statement. It does that for you. And if I'm loading the managed bean, which I did, then I'm going to do person bean load by unit, because this isn't a repeat, so I've got good access to the unit. And in this case, I'm just doing row get document, get universal ID. Okay, so that's how I'm either creating a new one or loading an existing one from my repeat control. If I look at the page itself, now the whole purpose of these Java objects, or one of the whole purposes of, other than it's just quite honestly a better language and it's better typed than a better editor, it's just better than JavaScript and server-side JavaScript, is to use expression language. Okay, so expression language, let me show it to you this way. The data source is binding to this managed bean. Again, there's no declaration on this page because it's already there for us. And it's bound to this field. And this is what it looks like in what's called expression language. And what expression language does is it automatically deals with getters and setters. So if we go back to the bean code, and if I come down here and I find first name, so there's a get first name, which returns first name, and then there's a set first name, which takes a value passed in and updates the private variable on the bean, right? So what the managed bean does is, and I don't have it in this example, but it's not done yet, but is if I put this in the read mode or edit mode, the the expression language will use the appropriate getter or setter. So I don't have to have two fields like in server-side JavaScript. If I want one for display only, one for edit only, right? So that's what expression language is, and that's the value of what it does. So in this case, for the save button here, for the manage bean, oops, let me bring this up here. If I look at this, all I'm doing is, again, it's just in memory, I call personbean.save. I'm using server-side JavaScript here. I could do, relatively sure, I could go to expression language and do personbean.save. You don't use the parentheses in expression languages and stuff like that. So that should work just as well. I end up using JavaScript for saves a lot because I usually have a lot more going on. There's a lot more logic there that I just don't know how to do in expression language. And expression language seems to be a little weak on passing parameters in and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so that is interacting with a managed bean with this Java code. But you don't have to only use a managed bean. There's also this thing called object data. Okay, and where does object data come from? Object data is a data source that came in with the extension library at some point, and it's right here. So it's a bound data source. So if you have the update pack in 853, the extension library, Domino 9, you have the ability to use object data. And what that gives, us is these properties here. So we can create an object, we can save an object, we can give it a name. In this case, I'm giving it object bean. Now, if you're a Java purist, this probably isn't a bean. We're probably actually working with just a plain old Java object. I just called it a scope bean and an object bean and a data bean. So I think the only true bean, if you're a purist, is a managed bean. So I could be wrong, though. So take that for what it is, because I am not a Java expert. And we're not going to be purists on the Notes in 9 screencast, because that's just crazy. Okay, so I just want to get that out there. So let's look at this creation. So we have this property of creating this object, right? And if we look at this, here I'm just going to set a variable, create a variable, and set it to my class, right? com.notesin9.examples.person. So this gives me my object based on this class. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually inspect the URL and determine from the URL whether or not I'm going to create a new one or load an existing one. So if the URL contains a parameter called key, then I'm going to assume, or here's the contains. I'm going to assume in this case it has a value. There's not a lot of, this is not a robust error trap demo. And I'm going to call temp.loadByKey. Otherwise, I'm going to say create it. And then I'm going to return this object to the object data. So that gives me my object data. And when I want to save the object, I'm going to just basically use the name objectBean.save. And I'm using JavaScript here again. This could be EL almost certainly. And this is the name. Now, read-only, I really want to get working. I've not figured that out yet, so if you know how, please drop me a line. And I don't have a good use case yet for the ignore request parms. And quite honestly, I forget what this one is now. This, yeah, I'm not sure what these other things are. But read-only, I do want to get working, and I haven't yet. And I actually have tried. So if you know, let me know. So how does this work for the object data? Because I think it's kind of cool. So if we go back to main and we look at the link that says new object data and the events, there's nothing here. Why? Because there's nothing to do. Because if you remember, in the creation of this guy, I'm saying if there's no parameter, then just create it, because there's nothing to pass in. So that implies that I need to pass a parameter when I want to actually read data in. So if we look at this link, again, there's no after event or anything going on here. But if I go to all properties for the object data link, you'll see that I've got a parameter that gets passed in. And it's the name of it is key. And if we look at it, I'm just passing in the unique key. So this is a case of, rather than having a big unit in the URL, I could have a much friendlier, much shorter term to pass that in. If sometimes users like that, sometimes they don't care. Okay, so that's how object data is getting to that page. And if I look at the page itself, these fields are going to work the exact same way, except instead of the name of the managed bean, I'm just calling this object bean. And again, it's probably not truly a bean. And if I did do the read-only stuff or so, because I'm using EL for everything, it would just work. And then the save event, no real. Actually, there's a difference here because, and this is kind of the neat thing about the object data, is I can just use the save document simple action. Now, object bean does not appear in the dropdown when you're creating it from scratch, but you can just type it in and use this object data. So I'm hopeful, and I'd really like to be able to use the toggle mode and some other things like that when I get that read-only thing working or so. But now we're just using the basic simple actions and stuff as if this object data was a document itself. So I think that's kind of cool. Okay. Oops. So the next one is the data context. Now, Managed Bean has probably gotten the most press in the blog community. Data context has gotten the second most press, as far as I can tell, in the community. Especially Paul Withers. He's a contributor to Notes of 9. I've spoken with him. He's a great guy. He's got a weird sense of humor. But he has done a lot with data context. I don't like data context. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But the way we're going to do the data context is we're going to trigger that on, let's see here, on session scope. So rather than parsing a parameter, here I'm going to use session scope. Now that's just the way I chose to do it. You could parse the parameter just as easily or use session scope for the object data. So I'm going to set a session scope to a user key. I'm going to set it to blank in the case of a new user. And for an existing user, it's going to be very similar to the last one. I'm going to put in the at unique, the unique key in there. And then if we go to data context and see how that looks, and that you can put a data context on the page, and you can put it on the panel. And where it lives on the page would be data context. I'm working in the panel, so we have to do the same thing, data context. And this just looks a little different because we don't have those other methods that built and save and stuff from the object data. So here it's going to look similar though inside that creation thing because I'm going to create it, and then I'm going to inspect my scope variable, and if it's blank, then I'm going to call create, and if it's not blank, then I'm going to pass that key value into the load by key. Okay, so it's all these things are very similar. These are just different ways to access these Java objects. And then once I have that data context in there, then I can use EL again, of course, which is one of the key things here. This is the most important thing about data context. This is why I don't like to use them. Can't believe I almost forgot to show you this because that would have been a lame demo. So if we find it, which is always interesting to drill down. Here's what I can tell you. If you have this set to compute dynamically, which is the default, it's not going to work. The only way I can get this to work is if I do compute on page load. I don't really know why. I don't know if I really care why. That's just the way it is. Now, if you follow some of Paul's writings there, he has some commentary on if it's bound to the page, it gets processed more. So even if it's during a partial refresh, it's going to get processed during the page rather than a partial refresh. Some things like that. So you do want to be a little careful about performance. And what kind of comes into play, which I've not figured out yet, when you're doing a partial refresh, is now we have this set partial execution mode. I think that's another way to help with your performance or so. But just keep in mind that the data context, you want to compute on page load, then just kind of like leave it sit there. Okay? And then if we look at the save button, it's going to look very much the same. I'd call it data bean dot save. Okay. Now the last one I want to show you is what I'm calling scope binding right now, which I've done before a couple times where I put a Java object in scope. On I think I did a show for Notes 9 on Java hash maps and stuff like that. But this kind of takes us to a whole nother level. So if I look at the scope binding here, here I'm kind of like doing this coding, this creation of the object up front on the initial page here. And here for the link where I'm creating, I'm in this one here where I'm creating the new scope binding, is I'm actually going to create the variable based on, their package. And I'm going to create it right here. And then I'm going to put this guy into scope, named scope bean. Okay? And then to load it, to retrieve it, or load an existing one, it's very similar. Is I'm going to create it, and I've got easy access to the unit here via get universal ID. So I'm going to call load by unit for my object, and then I'm going to put that in scope. Okay, so again, at no point do we put Domino objects in scope because these are serializable Java objects. So they're allowed to be in scope, and we can get away with this. You can't do this with Domino objects. Etc. So that's how we interact with it from here. And then if we look at the scope binding, here's the thing that I never knew before, and Jesse Gallagher, I believe, told me, is you can actually use EL for just putting these scoped objects. I thought you could only use JavaScript to access the methods on there, but you can actually use EL, he said. So we can get away with just the name of the scope bean and the first name because I guess one of the built-in variable resolvers of XPages will just find it. Okay, now I just had a meeting with my development team with Declan and Devin and Mike and them on this, and of course Devin threw out a question. Well, what happens if you have the same name in application scope and in session scope? Which one does it find? I have no idea. I believe I haven't tested it. I believe if you are going to kind of get crazy like that, then you can prefix this session scope being first name. But I haven't tested that. But that's would be assuming that works. That would be the solution for that scenario. Okay. So these are just the same thing, just bound, and the save button is just it looks very similar. Now, this one is actually in EL, and you can tell that. Okay, and then we also came up with the question. I think Declan did. If you notice my naming convention here is I capitalize this rather than lowercase, and we had a little discussion on what we thought was best, and we kind of came up with a conclusion that since this is lowercase here, we wanted to stick with the method is lowercase. We wanted to basic standardize on capitalizing this to just separate the object from the method itself. So whether it's scope bean or even in JavaScript, bean.save, whatever, we just kind of thought that the object deserved a capital letter up front. So that's just an aside that I did not think I was going to talk about. Okay, so we cancel there. So that's basically what I wanted to show you is that you can create these Java objects, and it is good to learn Java. It is good to have your code in here. It's a much better editor. You have much better capabilities in here. But once you do start to work with this, how do you use them on your page? Because managed bean just sounds like it's a scary term. And again, all managed bean means is you're auto creating this stuff from the faces context or faces config. So there's a couple different ways to do this. I personally am really getting into this object data. I think there's a lot of power there. Oh, and if we do object data, let me get back here. And I haven't done this yet, but I wanted to tell you about it if I can get this bigger. We look at the object data. There's even a scope here, so you could even, if you're working with application or with object data, you can put in an application or a session scope. Now, I haven't tried that yet. My first thought was, well, how do you get it back? Well, I think it's just there then. So, like, then if you created this object bean on a second page, I think it just doesn't run the create business because it sees it's there and then just gives that back to you. So that's kind of cool. It kind of makes me wonder if you can kind of make a custom control that just has your data source in there and kind of maybe do something that way or so. But at that point, maybe you're better off just using the managed bean. I don't know. There's a lot of ways to do this. So the point of this show is just to show you different ways to use and work with Java code. So you've got the managed bean, which a lot of people have been talking about. This new object data, the data context, which I'm rapidly losing interest in, and this scoped binding thing. That's really cool to me because that just seems easy, because you're keeping a lot. I think you're keeping a lot of code in the same place. It's not being moved, you know, around. Oops, and stuff. Let's come back here. Yeah, I showed this. So again, it just seems kind of, whether it's for a single page or in my case, session scope, because I'm spanning pages, it just seems kind of nice to do that, nice and simple. So, and of course, there's nothing special about these deletes here, which, there you go. Okay, so that is what I wanted to show you in this demo. And that's the demo. This is, since it's my show. If you have any questions, feel free to drop me a line on it. And if you have anything else, comments on the YouTube versus downloading or so, I'd be interested in hearing that either via email or Twitter or on the comments on the blog. So I thank you for your time.